children in brown paper and bubble wrap. Instead of root. But the most famous male child was Mary Pierstroff. This is Mary. Her parents threw her ass in the mail. Okay, let's get back to the story. May Pierstroff was indeed sent by an Idaho Railway mail car in 1914 with the appropriate stamps stuck to her travel coat. Her adventure made it into a children's book, Mailing May, with postage stamps. The high IQ mind will blow you away. IQ mind will blow you away, ladies and gentlemen. May's picture survived, but no physical evidence of her trip. Okay, so she was mailed in Idaho to go to nearby relatives. She was mailed. In 1914, the Postmaster General instituted a rule: a tank was airborne. He climbed out, pilfered thousands of dollars worth of goods from the registered mail, and sealed himself back up. He was arrested at the Atlanta airport in 1980 after his trunk popped open as it was being unloaded. Damn, he got busted. We have his oxygen tank at the Postal Museum, Pope noted with pride. Yeah, y'all can take pride in this shit all you want. This is dumb as hell. William DeLucia. Hold on, y'all. I'm gonna look this nut job up who mailed himself. I'll be right back. All right, here is the musical instrument box that this guy shipped himself in 1980. They said this is in the Smithsonian Institute now. This is the nut job, and this is his oxygen tank right here. Let's get some more of that good old American drug history. The greatest drug fiends in the world, an American opioid crisis in 1908. See, in 1908, ladies and gentlemen, Black people were sharecropping. Black women were working domestically inside the homes of white folks. And they were being picked up on bogus charges like vagrancy and not having a job and laughing out loud in public. You know, those real violent crimes that we're told we're doing all the time. While we were in hard labor, our white counterparts were getting high. They were working hard at getting high. But let's get into this great American white bread history. In this illustration of McClure magazine story, a woman left displays her needle marks. Oh man, genteel women with easy access to doctors and drugs made up the majority of late 19th century addicts. She's gazing down at those track marks on her arms, ladies and gentlemen, working hard at getting high. The president, a swaggering populist from New York, was worried that a national crisis of opiates addiction was weakening America and diminishing its greatness that it never had. So, in 1908, Teddy Roosevelt appointed a handsome doctor with a handlebar mustache. Yeah, right. He probably looked like a monkey with a mustache. Hamilton Wright to be the nation's first opium commissioner. See, they had to do the same thing back then as they do now because so many of these caucasoids were just straight up junkies. While we were working hard, they were working hard at getting high. Americans, Wright warned, have become the greatest drug fiends in the world. Now, what's going on now? The biggest junkies on the planet are in America. America leads the entire world in drug addiction. See, ladies and gentlemen, these people just simply can't change. They just can't change. But let's get a little more into this great white bread history. The United States developed a pernicious narcotic habit in the decades after the Civil War. Anguished veterans were hooked on morphine. Now, aren't the VA veterans of today hooked on opioids? Some things never change. Genteel society women dosed up on laudanum and tincture of alcohol and opium. So they were mixing alcohol and opium just like they are today. The wonder drug was widely used as a cough suppressant and proved very effective in treating diarrhea in kids. So see, look, they were doping up their kids with opioids, talking about it's good for diarrhea. Opiates were wickedly addictive too. And as more and more Americans began abusing them, their control became a cause célèbre for progressive era reformers like Wright. The habit has this nation in its grip to an astonishing extent, he told the New York Times in 1911. Our prisons and hospitals are full of victims of it. It has robbed 10,000 businessmen of moral sense and made them beasts who prey upon their fellows. It has become one of the most futile causes of unhappiness and sin in America, United States. More than a century later, America has relapsed. The current opioid abuse plague is more lethal, with record number of fatal overdoses, public health experts note. But it's not the first time in U.S. history that the lax commercialization of legal opioids led to a national plague. But see, this time the plague is worldwide. It's just that America has the biggest junkies in the world because they got the biggest people that are the most full of shit in the world, too. So it all makes sense. The little known history of America's first experiment with narcotic and the federal government response to it are today a source of optimism for those who argue that tougher regulation and enforcement can bring the current crisis under control. Well, it's been 20 years of waiting for you to bring it under control. I guess, well, whatever. That is your problem. Faced with a late 19th century dope scourge, doctors, pharmacists, and federal law enforcement officials eventually managed to contain the country's first addiction plague. And look, here's their soothing opioid cough syrup for infants, drugging up the infants, working hard at getting high. Miss Winslow will relieve gripping in the bowels. Sounds disgusting. Instantly cure when colic. Soothing syrup for children. Yeah, just drugging up the children so they can shut the hell up. That's what it was for. And its active ingredients was morphine. Yeah, I guess it was popular. Too lazy to deal with your kids, so you drugged them up so they could leave you alone. Over the last 150 years of drug use in America, when a problem has emerged, the government has responded, said the DEA official Sean Farrens, the former director of the agency's small museum on the ground floor of its headquarters near the Pentagon. I wish we wouldn't have to keep learning about the dangers of these drugs the hard way, he said. But ultimately, the turning point comes only when people really begin to see the damage we are doing to our society. Well, you must not be seeing that at all because y'all been drug addicts since you've been on American soil. But let's move on. Lesser waves of opiates abuse, especially heroin, returned several times during the 20th century, especially in large cities, and most notably in the 1970s, ladies and gentlemen. Drug use all through the centuries. America famous for being the biggest druggies the world over. But let's move on. But the late 19th century was the only other era in U.S. history where the opiates addiction was truly a nationwide crisis, scholars said, afflicting urban and rural areas alike, up and down the country's social and economic strata. Then, as now, it started with drug manufacturers, doctors, and pharmacists, not push-us on the street. The advent of the hypodermic needle. The sticky sap of the opium poppy has been relieving pain and getting people high for at least 5,000 years. Ancient Sumerians called it the joy plant. The Egyptians traded opium throughout the Mediterranean. An itinerant Arab merchants probably introduced it to China in the 7th century, just druggies worldwide. Opium became an engine of human commerce and conquest. English merchants, led by English East Indian Company, arguably the world's first modern drug cartel. The English, the first drug cartels. Okay, set up extensive colonial era opium supply chains that dominate sales in Europe and East Asia. When the Chinese emperors tried to stop them, the British waged the Opium Wars of the mid-19th century, occupying Hong Kong to make sure the drug markets remained open. Now, do you wonder why China is shipping over so much fentanyl and opioids to the US? Maybe it's revenge for those opium wars. But don't expect the Caucasoids to wake up. They just simply won't piece it together. So let's move on, ladies and gentlemen. English poets romanticized the recreational use of drugs. You know what? This makes me laugh because I read an article on heroin addicts saying they love the feeling of the high because it makes them feel like they're in love. And they romanticized about drugs. And by the time Thomas de Quincey published Confessions of an English Opioid Eater, Confessions of an English Opium Eater. Oh yeah, that sounds really romantic. In 1821, the British were importing tens of thousands of pounds of it per year. Historians said it wasn't until after the American Civil War that the use and abuse of opiates spread widely across the United States. Some of the first addicts were morphine-dependent veterans of the war, suffering from all manner of physical and psychological pain, an infliction known as soldier's disease. Boy, they come up with these elaborate names. I just don't know what I'm going to do. So in other words, your soldiers were a bunch of junkies. You know, you really think about it, the most animated these people ever were was when they were lynching black people in the Civil War. Other than that, the history is already written. They didn't work. White people did not work during slavery. Okay, look at them old, probably drugged up morphine looking soldiers here. Let's move on. Go take a bath. Okay. Morphine was invented in the 1820s. But, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I got to get the phone. I'll be right back. You know, I love my family, but they have some rotten ass timing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on. Now, where was I? Morphine was invented in the 1820s. But it was the advent of the hypodermic needle that allowed the drug to be injected for the first time. The quick delivery to the bloodstream dramatically intensified the euphoric payload. Soon, syringes were being sold through the Sears and Roebuck catalog. You know, they also sold cocaine, ladies and gentlemen, in the catalog. Let's move on with DIY, do-it-yourself drug vials, according to the DEA's Ferns. Around the same time, you began to see an admonitory literature appear in medical journals saying, you need to be careful with this. Don't leave the syringe with the patient, according to David Courtwright, a leading historian on American drug abuse at the University of North Florida. For decades, opium, morphine, and other narcotics had been the active ingredients in an array of unregulated tinctures and cure-alls sold by neighborhood apothecaries. Itinerant peddlers or doctors making house calls. Oh, so the doctor came right to your house with the opium, huh? How convenient, ladies and gentlemen, working hard at getting high. Just as the contemporary opiate crisis appears to have a gender imbalance, with increasing proportion of women getting hooked, the 19th century addict was typically female and middle class, according to Courtwright, author, Dark Paradise. The history of opiate addiction in America. Women were prescribed opiates after childbirth. Oh my goodness. And to treat female problems, menstrual cramps. Yeah, while the Black woman got nothing. Moving on. Many migrant workers from China who were hired to build roads and railroads and became addicts in labor camps and tenements of Western cities. Remember, they had the drug dens. In fact, that's what they're sitting in right now. The first drug control ordinance in U.S. history were issued in San Francisco in an attempt to stop the spread of opium dens, where the white clientele gladly visited with their $8. Unbelievable. Looked like a roach hotel, but moving on. Then, 1895, German pharmaceutical giant Bayer came out with a new wonder drug, more powerful than aspirin, that worked phenomenally well as a cough suppressant. Its name was Hiroshik. It was hero shit. Meaning strong, heroic. But in the United States, it was marketed under a different brand named heroin. I like hero shit better. I'm calling heroin hero shit. Hero shit. Along with cocaine, it was recommended as safe alternative to morphine for addicts trying to shake their dependency, and flooded the markets in many forms: tinctures, pills, even heroin throat lozenges. These people are such junkies, man. So they had liquid form, pill form, and a throat lozenger. They're all loaded with with heroin. It possessed many advantages over morphine. The Boston Medical and Surgical Journal wrote in 1900 advancing claims with a chilling similarity to early advertisements for OxyContin. It's not hypnotic, and there's no danger of acquiring a habit. You don't have nothing on the streets now but a bunch of habit forming drugs. And this is why those addicts have grown over 20 years to 23 million in America. No danger of acquiring a habit. Yeah, yeah, right. The first drug kingpins. Around that time, the specter of the junkie and dope fiend began to appear as a stigmatized character in lurid newspaper accounts. The early 20th century was also a period of racial anxiety and growing hostility towards migrants. And didn't Trump just put another travel ban in effect? Still showing all that anxiety and hostility towards immigrants. Ladies and gentlemen, some things never change. Some things never change. Change is not what they can handle. That's why they're going to be crying on their way out. In their push for narcotics, crackdowns, crusaders like Wright and the Opium Commission played to fears that opium smoking white women would end up trading drugs for sex with Asian men. No, see, that's where your woman is a willing participant. They just don't want to believe their women will sleep with any man on this planet and don't give a damn. Don't want to believe it. The temperance movement wasn't just alcohol. It was also drugs that were ruining the moral temperament of Americans, said Lloyd Setterer, the chief medical officer of the New York Office of Mental Health and the author of a forthcoming book about the current opioid crisis. Again, Black people were sharecropping and on prison farms over vagrancy and laughing out loud in public. Our women were domestic workers and they were getting high. The US government began taxing opium in 1890, and the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 forced manufacturers to disclose the content of their products, so consumers wary of the drug would know if it was lurking in their kids' cough syrup or not. You see them passing all kinds of legislation and, about the drug plague that's going on. And you can see they were doing the same thing back then. These people are like a broken record in history. 3 years later, Congress passed the Opium Exclusion Act, banning its import for the purpose of smoking. Okay, so it was okay to do as long as you weren't smoking it. People are silly. No wonder why you got a drug problem in 2017. Roosevelt sent Wright to lead an American delegation for the first International Opium Commission in Shanghai in 1909 and another gathering at The Hague in 1912 that produced the first global attempt to regulate narcotics. And I guess these were your people that were there at the conference. No wonder why you still got a drug problem. Wright continued to push for U.S. legislation over the objections of drug manufacturers, an effort that culminating the Harris Narcotic Act, Tax Act of 1914. It taxed and tightly regulated the sale and distribution of opium and cocaine-based products, the first broad crackdown in a century of American narcotics prohibition. Opiates remained available for short-term medical use. Isn't that what they're now saying? The doctors are trying to prescribe opioids only for 5 days now. Ain't working. But not to maintain addiction, and thousands of doctors and pharmacists were arrested under the Harrison laws, according to Cabrera. A younger generation of physicians viewed opiates far more warily, issuing fewer prescriptions, said Courtwright, and made crucial differences in the prevention of new addicts. Isn't that what they're doing now? See, these people, they can't change for shit. You can see why their society is failing when it comes down to the drugs. They struggled with drugs in the past. They're struggling with drugs now. Oh, let's move on. Prohibition era gangsters like Arnold Rothstein, who trafficked in illegal heroin, would become the country's first drug kingpins in the 1920s, but the number of opiate addicts, Americans, would never be as large again until now. At the peak of the 19th century addiction crisis, roughly 300,000 Americans were probably hooked, according to Courtwright, despite higher estimates by Wright and other activists that were probably inflated. See, they couldn't get an accurate number then, and they can't get one now. Some things never change, ladies and gentlemen. You can count on these people never, ever changing. Today, the United States have 4 times as many people, but perhaps 10 times as many addicts. Stop overdoses. Carry naloxone. You seriously put this billboard up? Oh my God. It's a billboard in Ohio. Moreover, 21st century dope, especially heroin, spiked with synthetic opioids like fentanyl, is more addictive than anything before, according to narcotics experts. The highs are higher. Isn't that what they like? As are the risk of lethal overdose. U.S. law enforcement agents have never had to confront criminal networks as sophisticated and well-financed as the drug traffickers who dominate narcotic distribution today. And the flow of American opioid continue over and under the counter. While new prescriptions for opioid-based drugs peaked in 2011 and have declined slightly, prescribing levels in 2015 were still 3 times that of 1999. The latest figures show dependent Americans who can no longer get the drugs from pharmacies are turning to illegal markets in greater numbers than ever before, or they're just holding up the pharmacy altogether, or anywhere that got drugs. That is the biggest difference between the 19th century crisis and the contemporary one, said Dr. DuPont, the former White House drug czar, who helped develop the first methadone maintenance program in the 1970s to treat heroin addiction. So treat drugs with drugs. Ladies and gentlemen, this drug plague ain't going nowhere. These high IQ people never fail to amaze me. Let's move on. Both plagues began with over-the-counter prescription of pain medication, but today illegal traffickers are far more able to step in as the government cracks down. The sea change is the illegal market, DuPont said. The move towards synthetic opioids like fentanyl will make everything much harder. The dogs can't sniff it. You can send it through the mail. It's very scary. Mm-mm-mm. Mm-mm-mm. Ladies and gentlemen, you know what this proves? It proves that America has never conquered a drug problem since she's been colonized. Okay? They had an inability to stop drugs then, and they have an inability to stop drugs now. But these are the ones with the high IQs. They are the ones that know everything. They are the ones that got everything. Even when you give them all kinds of advantages, they still can't overcome a drug addiction. Those same opioids are prescribed to Black people. But since doctors believe we don't feel pain, we didn't get hooked on it like white people did. So, ladies and gentlemen, drug fiends of yesterday are the drug fiends of today. Please tell me what you think about this great white bread American history, y'all. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And if you can donate to my channel, please do. Peace, family. You know, one thing about America, they teach history in a way that always make it seem like the Caucasoids were always victorious. Well, that just was simply not the case. We had many victories that have been covered up all throughout the history. Sometimes it did work out for our ancestors and they would win big, just like the Gullah Wars. And sometimes they would just take a chance on fighting and they lost. And then in other cases, they would commit suicide. They would rather be dead than be enslaved to these Caucasoids. So things did not go as easy as they always portray in the movies. They always make it seem like on the slave ships, the slaves were just chained up in the bottom and they were helpless and they couldn't do anything about their situation. Well, as we get through this video, you're going to see that was not always the case. You know, again, this is all part of psychological warfare, always trying to make you believe you didn't do anything successful. They got all the success. It's just simply not true. Through all these centuries, they won everything. Come on. You can't believe that, brothers and sisters. If they think I believe that, then they're stupid, because I don't. As we can see, they don't even win all of their wars. They didn't win Iraq. They did not win Afghanistan. They did not win Vietnam. Bay of Pigs, they did not win that. They've had a lot of losses. Okay, they just don't want to put those losses all in the history books, or just like they don't want to put our victories in the history books either. So let's just go over some of the revolts that were recorded. Now, many were not, and you're going to see in some of the slave revolt articles that you can find online, they will even tell you some of these revolts happened and they were never recorded. And there were a few that were recorded. Now, how do you know these things occur? Because there would be some crew members left alive to tell the story on what happened. And those stories were recorded. Sometimes the entire crew was wiped out. So by the Africans, And so there's no recorded history because it was nobody to come back and tell what happened. And a lot of times when they were able to gain control over the ship, a lot of times the ships would be stripped down and torn apart by the Africans. So not only did we kill the crew, we destroyed a lot of the slave ships. So it's really interesting. A lot of these insurrections happened during the transatlantic slave trade, and most of the ones that are recorded happened between 1699 and 1865. All right, so there are 50 mutinies that occurred, and some say it's as high as 485. So we're going to get into some of those. This one is an article from Rutgers University. 1764, a ship called the Adventure lay at anchor off the coast of Africa. Africans attacked the ship and killed the crew and liberated the captives. Also in 1764, the slaves aboard the ship Hope revolted. In the uprising, 2 crew members and 8 slaves were killed. In January 1731, an English paper reported that Captain Jump and all but 3 of his crew had been killed in a slave uprising off the coast of Africa. In 1735, a Captain Moore of Mass reported on the night of June 17th, his ship was attacked by Africans on the Gambian River in West Africa. The battle lasted half the night. 1 crew member was killed, and at dawn the Africans were driven off. Their attack was unsuccessful. In 1761, aboard a Boston ship called the Thomas, the slaves revolted and tried to kill the crew. In March 1742, slavers aboard the Jolly Bachelor, oh man, y'all couldn't think of a better name than that, Caucasoids, were loading captives onto the ship in the Sierra Leone River. Africans attacked. Captain Cutler and 2 of his crew were killed. The Africans stripped the boat of its riggings and sails and liberated the captives in the hold and abandoned the ship. This was a successful attack. All right. So some were and some weren't, but you know what? I have a lot of respect for our ancestors for even trying. They did not willingly go, as you can see. In 1789, 35 slaves aboard the Felicity rose up against the captors. Captain William Fairchild was killed, and 3 slaves were killed before the uprising was crushed. In June 1730, Captain George Scott sailed from the Guinea coast with a cargo of 96 slaves aboard a ship, Little George. 6 days out to the sea, the slaves revolted. They broke through the bulkhead of the ship and on board the deck. The crew retreated to a cabin and tried to make a bomb. The bomb went off, and the explosion nearly destroyed the ship. The captain and some of the crew remained in prison in the cabin for several days while the slaves steered the ship back to the coast of Africa and successfully escaped when they came in sight of the coast. This was one of the more successful uprisings. Apparently, the captain lived to tell about it. That is just phenomenal. See, that's a movie. That's a movie right there, ladies and gentlemen. In December 1753, one Captain Bear was loading captives onto his ship, the Coast Castle in West Africa. The slaves rebelled and killed the captain and all the crew except for 2. These 2 crewmen escaped by leaping overboard to escape and swimming ashore. The uprising seemed to have been a victory. We only know about it from the two crew members who jumped overboard. In 1765, nearly the entire crew of a ship from Bristol, Rhode Island, was killed in a slave uprising off the coast of Africa. The lone survivor was a Mr. Dunfield, who was out in a small boat when the uprising occurred, and it is only from him that the incident is known. In 1776, there was an unsuccessful uprising aboard the Thomas. There were 160 slaves aboard. The crewmen were armed and retreated behind a barricade. The captives were unable to overpower the crew, and many of them jumped overboard. This was suicidal, and 33 drowned. These people preferred to take their chances in the sea rather than to submit to whatever fate awaited them. There were two famous uprisings aboard ships in the United States through the 1800s. These were the incidents involving the Amistad, 1839, and the Creole, 1841. July 1839, slaves aboard a Spanish ship called the Amistad revolted and won control of the ship. The leader of the revolt was Joseph Clec Senke. The captives spoke Mende. It was a West African language. They piloted the ship to Long Island, New York. There was a trial to determine what to do with them, since in 1808 the external slave trade had ended. Former President John Quincy Adams defended them, and the Supreme Court ruled that they should be set free and allowed to return to Africa. Sadly, when some of them returned to Africa, they found their homes and villages destroyed and everyone gone. They had been raided and carried away in warfare. In October 1841, a ship called the Creole sailed from the Hamptons Roads, VA, Virginia, towards New Orleans, and 135 slaves en route Madison, Washington, and Ben Blacksmith led the insurrection. On November 7th, the ship neared the Bahamas. The slaves revolted. They seized all the firearms and threatened to throw the crew overboard if they were not taken to an English colony. England had emancipated its slaves in 1833. The ship landed in Nassau in the Bahamas, and the slaves escaped. The U.S. government, under pressure from Southerners, lodged a formal complaint. It demanded that the British return the fugitive slaves. British told the U.S. to get lost. In conclusion, Black people did not just passively surrender to Middle Passage. They were carried here in chains, kicking and screaming and fighting back. As the Black historian Vincent Hardy said, these ships were prison ships. They were death ships, carrying Black people to a prison state called slavery in America. Even though the odds were stacked against the captive on those ships, they tried to revolt anyway. Sometimes their efforts were successful, sometimes they were not. But the idea that Black people did not just try to resist is absurd. Black people resisted and were subdued by superior power and force of arms. As Green and others point out, the captive women also played a role in these uprisings. The uprising aboard the Jolly Bachelor and the Little George and the Amistad and the Creole are best known. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Our ancestors were fighters, and we are their offspring, and we should have that kind of fight in us. And I hope one day a lot of our people will realize we are a power to be reckoned with. You just got to stop believing what these cockazoids say and start believing in yourself, because that warrior is in all of us, both men and women. We just have to be brave enough to bring it out. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And if you can donate to this channel, please do. Peace, family.
Hi, shalom, shalom from Israel. This is Ola, the daughter of Jethro. And I just heard that you black people that was stolen from Africa to America, that you don't know who you are. But you are the children of Yahweh, the children of Israel. And I'm telling you, you have to come back to your homeland, here to Zion, to Jerusalem, because us the Gentiles, we do need you. We need you to come and pray because you are our saviors. You're the one that was chosen by Yahweh to live in this land, not the Jewish people, it's you. You were stolen from Africa, they deceived you, they told you that you are slaves, but you actually the children of Israel. And it's time just to come back. Come for your people, come back for us, come back for the whole Gentiles, because only you gonna save us. So please come back to Zion.
About 10 years ago, I wrote an article that was online for a while. It's no longer there anymore. And it was on Madam C.J. Walker. And her great-granddaughter saw my article and loved it. And she reached out to me and sent an email letting me know not only did she admire my article, she also gave me additional information about her great-grandmother that I didn't know, and I'm going to share that with you. Madam C.J. Walker, 1867 to 1919, lauded as the first Black millionaire woman in America. That's phenomenal for a woman of those times during the Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and she still managed to become a millionaire. Do you know what the odds of that happening are when you got a system that's against you? That's pretty damn phenomenal. For her successful line of hair care products, born Sarah Breedlove, she was widowed by age 20, and what actually happened was her husband was lynched. He had left the home to go to work and never returned. And it was maybe a few days later she had found out he was grabbed and lynched. Can you imagine how devastating that is? And in those times, Black families did not always get the bodies back of their loved ones. What these white devils would do is throw them into a wooden coffin and just bury them. And sometimes the families would believe they just walked off and left them, and the men were actually lynched. It's so sad. She took to work as a laundress. After seeking treatment for hair loss, she developed the Walker system and sold her homemade products directly to Black women, a talent for self-promotion. She helped build a booming empire. Now, you know what this woman did? She would carry her 2-year-old daughter in her arms and go door to door in the Black neighborhood that she lived in, selling her product. And that's how she got her product off the ground. She spent lavishly on luxurious homes. Walker also funded scholarships for women, and these were for Black women, for the Tuskegee Institution, and she donated large sums to the NAACP, the Black YMCA, and dozens of other charities. And she was also a big advocate for anti-lynching laws. Born Sarah Breedlove, the daughter of Louisiana sharecroppers, Walker was orphaned at 6, married at 14, and widowed at 20, with a 2-year-old daughter to care for. She resettled in St. Louis and went to work as a laundress. Her early years she reflected patterns all too common for Black women of her generation. In 1905, Walker, who had been losing her hair, sought a treatment for the condition. The method of beauty culture she developed revolutionized Black hair care. The combination of scalp preparation, applications of lotion, and use of iron combs became known as the Walker system. She distinguished her hair products from the straighteners advocated by white cosmetic firms, arguing that her treatment was geared to the special health needs of Blacks. She sold her homemade products directly to Black women using a personal approach that won her customers and eventually a fleet of loyal saleswomen. All of her saleswomen were Black. And she had 3,000 Black women go door to door selling her products. Pretty damn amazing for a woman to do that during Jim Crow. Pretty damn amazing. Walker trained her beauty culturalists after establishing her business headquarters in Denver, with a branch in Pittsburgh managed by her daughter, Alelia. Her second husband, Charles J. Walker, a journalist, helped promote his wife's flourishing enterprise. Her lectures and demonstration won thousands of customers, and in 1910 she moved her headquarters to Indianapolis. Her business employed over 3,000 workers, mainly door-to-door saleswomen, and these women were all Black. Can you imagine, even in today's climate, being able to hire 3,000 Black people? That is absolutely amazing. Her product line of nearly 20 hair and skin items was widely advertised in the Black press. Walker, whose talent for self-promotion made her one of the best-known Black Americans during the first quarter of the century. Unbelievable. She was definitely a legend before her time. And she actually, it talks about her Manhattan townhouse, but she actually had a mansion in Harlem. And I believe it's still there. I'm not 100% sure. I believe it is. But it became a salon for members of her during the Harlem Renaissance. Walker also owned luxurious country home, a villa, and in Irvington on Hudson, designed by a Black architect, Ventnor Tandy. And one thing that I love about her, she was very generous with her wealth. She helped a lot of Black people. You couldn't just work for Madam C.J. Walker. If you worked for her, one of the things that she made every single one of her employees commit to, after they worked for her, going back into the Black community and helping the community. That was also part of the requirement that she had for her employees. They must help the Black community. Unbelievable. Walker was as generous as she was successful, establishing a network of clubs for her employees and offering bonuses and prizes to those who contributed their communities. They had to contribute to their communities. So the more her workers contributed to the community, the more of a bonus she would give them. She was a real firm believer in helping other Black people out. And that's what I love about her. And she also contributed to many charitable works, and she did many charitable works as well. She promoted female talent. The charter of her company provided only a woman would serve as president. And after she passed on, her daughter became president. She was a standard bearer for Black self-help, funding scholarships for women at the Tuskegee Institute. So, so she was a big advocate for helping. And I think that's what I loved about her. Madam C.J. Walker plans for her headquarters, the Walker Building. And I'm going to show you a picture of her building. It still stands in Indianapolis. Here it is right here. It's now the Walker Theater. But this was the building that she had purchased in 1910 in Indianapolis, where she worked and did her business and developed her product. It still stands, ladies and gentlemen. This is a historical site. That's why it's never been torn down. Pretty damn amazing. Okay, the Walker Building, where she carried out after her premature deaths, her death at 51. She died young. Wow, she didn't even get to become a senior. The structure, completed in 1927, today is part of the historic renovated district in downtown Indianapolis. But there used to be a picture of her mansion. I don't know if I'll find it, but let me see if I can. Madam C.J. Walker's mansion. There used to be a picture of it, but I don't know if it still exists. But let's see if it does. Here it is, right here, y'all. This is her mansion. Can you imagine being able to live like that in 1910? This woman lived like this in 1910. Okay? So don't tell me we did not have awesome ancestors. We absolutely did, ladies and gentlemen. And don't let these white devils tell you you can't run a business, you can't do anything. Hell to the yes, we can. All right, here's an old picture of her. Yeah, I think this is right. Yeah, this is an old picture right in front of her mansion. And these are an old picture of her workers right here. And what I will do is I will leave links to these pictures if you want to look at them. It's beautiful. It's almost hard to believe there was one of our ancestors that got to live so lavishly during those times. So beautiful. Please leave your comments and subscribe. And if you can donate to this channel, please do. Peace, family. A lot of American history is lacking a lot of truth. If you leave it up to these Caucasians to tell the story, they're going to leave out so many things. And one of the biggest things they will leave out are all of the uprisings and the moments that our ancestors actually rose up and fought back. And you may ask, why don't we ever hear about this? Because they're afraid that if you find out how hard they fought back, it'll give you the idea to rise up against them. So what they've done was create this fake history of our ancestors just being afraid and shaking and just being good slaves. It did not happen, ladies and gentlemen. Not only did we fight wars on this soil with these Caucasoids during slavery, there were fights, deadly fights, on the slave ships. And many of these Caucasoids were killed on those slave ships. Not to mention, there were a few ships where the slaves were able to gain control and take the ship back to Africa. See, they're not going to tell you all of this stuff. Now, there was something that they tried to mask and disguise as the Seminole Wars. The Seminole Wars were actually the Gullah Wars. And this is where a slave rebellion that went on in the South from 1739 to 1858, I believe. I know this says 59, but I believe it was 58. And our ancestors got together, formed an army. These were a lot of runaway slaves. They formed an army, and they were kicking the ass of those Caucasoids down there in the South, killing them left and right. Okay? And you're about to hear about the Gullah Wars that really happened. And yes, it went on for over 100 years. And it just go to show you this fakery of our ancestors got put in their place by this Caucasoid all the time. It didn't happen that way. Many times there were uprisings. Many times they got killed in high numbers during this 100 years, but they won't tell you this. So let's go ahead and watch this video on the Gullah Wars.
Black history is taught like this. You started off as a slave, then white folks felt bad and decided to free you. Then civil rights legislation made you equal. And finally, you achieved victory with Obama's election. The end. Of course, that is ridiculous. That is the white supremacist version of Black history. The end result of this miseducation is that Black children are separated from their own people's legacy and historical achievements. Everybody in the world has the right to draw inspiration from their own people's legacy. And this right is robbed from Black children because their history is actively hidden, distorted, and replaced with make-believe. For this video, we will carefully cover the facts on how Black people became liberated from American chattel slavery. The miseducational system has taught us three gigantic myths about the freeing of the slaves. The first myth is that there was only some slave rebellions here and there, but not any kind of large-scale military resistance to slavery initiated and carried out by Black men. The second myth is that any slaves who wanted freedom basically fled north to be granted freedom. The third myth is that the Civil War was the primary event that ended chattel slavery. The reality is that there was a series of battles, revolts, and rebellions that lasted from 1739 to 1858. This was the Gullah Wars. That is more than 100 years of warfare totally hidden from the American history books. A lot of this history was disguised as the Seminole Wars. First of all, the Seminoles were not a real Native American tribe. They were Native Americans allied with and often led by Black Africans. Seminole literally means runaway. Maroon means fugitive. Gullah refers to the Black Africans. The Emancipation Proclamation was a staged event, and it was designed to stop and historically hide the self-liberation process of Africans in America. Africans were brought into the Anglo-American New World Order, and many of these Africans maintained the goal to kill, crush, and destroy white supremacy. 1739, the Gullah War begins. Carolina was about to pass the Security Act, which would require whites to be armed more often to prevent a slave uprising. So the slaves decided that this was the time to strike. About 20 of them went to the local store, stocked up on guns and ammo, killed the shopkeeper, and began the Stonewall Rebellion. The rebels marched, and as they marched, their following grew larger and larger. They chanted out liberty as they marched, chasing the slave owners, killing them, and burning their houses down. After the rebellion, South Carolina passed the Negro Act, which prevented a future rebellion by limiting the rights of the slaves. From that point in time until 1812, the Gullah were fighting continuous battles against the state militia in Florida. Spain was fighting against the American colonists for land in Florida. The Spanish started arming the Gullah and providing them with military training. The Gullah used this military equipment and training to defend their own free, independent black towns. The first black town in North America was called Garcia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose. It was built by the black man and officially recognized later by the Spanish Lieutenant General Montillano in 1738. This black town was a place that slaves could escape to have their own land and receive military training. 1814, Andrew Jackson defeated the Native American Creek Confederation. He imposed on them the Treaty of Fort Jackson, which basically stole their land. So Chief Sakafoka led thousands of his warriors to Florida and joined forces with the mighty Gullah Nation. The so-called Indian Wars were actually the Gullah Wars. General Thomas Jessup said, "Throughout my operations, I found the Negroes the most active and determined warriors, and during the conferences with the Indian chief, I ascertained that they exercised an almost controlling influence over them. This, you may be assured, is a Negro and not an Indian war." 1816, the Battle of Negro Fort. Negro Fort was a structure built by the British and occupied and led by black Gullahs. Andrew Jackson ordered Colonel Clinch to destroy Negro Fort. After they destroyed Negro Fort, Andrew Jackson ordered the torture of the leaders and the enslavement of the black captives. This was a historical turning point in Gullah military strategy. The Gullah leaders who escaped decided that they would never again use the British strategy of fighting from a fixed fortified position. They decided instead that they would return to using the traditional Gullah method of guerrilla warfare, which involved striking and vanishing, luring the enemy into strange areas. The forest, the pasture, the swamp. They had the advantage with decentralized warfare because they knew the land better. As more and more slaves fled south for freedom, thousands of U.S. soldiers died at the hands of the superior Gullah warriors. 1818, the Battle of Suwanee. A stretch of towns along the Suwanee River was occupied by a series of self-sufficient Native American and Gullah colonies. Once again, General Andrew Jackson came to terrorize and invade them. The Gullah and the Native American warriors, allied in the swamps, inflicted heavy damage on the invading army. Andrew Jackson was defeated by the Gullahs, however, he fraudulently claimed the battle as a victory. After the Gullah warriors and their allies disappeared into the swamps, Andrew Jackson exacted revenge against them by slaughtering a nearby settlement of their women and children. The killing of women and children was the only victory Andrew Jackson achieved in the Battle of Suwanee. This black history was actively hidden. Whenever the word black or Negro or African were mentioned in war reports, the words were simply omitted or replaced with an asterisk. The Gullah Wars were also hidden from the newspapers so they wouldn't scare away potential European settlers. Real American history shows that the black man was destroying the institution of slavery. 1822, the resistance had grown completely out of control of the United States government. In Charleston, South Carolina, almost all the slaves in the area had joined a movement to carry out a massive slave revolt. What white people had not considered is that every time you capture a free Gullah warrior and sell him into slavery, the Gullah warrior will only spread his own knowledge amongst the new slaves he's living with. This rebellion was to be led by Denmark Vesey and his lieutenant Peter Poyas. 9,000 slaves were planning to revolt that day. However, the revolt never actually took place because cowardly black people involved with the movement informed the white colonists of these plans. Everyone involved ended up being executed or sold away to another plantation. 1835, the victory over the King Fort Relief, otherwise known as the Dade Massacre. The reason it was recorded as a massacre instead of a battle was to hide the fact that it was a legitimate military victory for the Black Gullah. Also in 1835, the U.S. Army suffered another defeat at the Withlacoochee River, forcing General Gaines to leave Florida. 1837, Colonel Taylor claimed the Battle of Lake Okeechobee as a victory for the United States. In reality, the Gullah warriors and the Native Americans had already started fleeing the area and spreading the Gullah resistance to other parts of America. The real war that ended slavery was not the Civil War, it was the Gullah Wars. It was Native Americans and Black Muslim Gullahs against the white Christian colonists. The so-called Civil War was carried out for elitist banking and business interests, and it also served as a formality, a ceremonial ending to chattel slavery. In reality, slavery ended in America because it couldn't be maintained against the constant guerrilla attacks, and the only way to stop those attacks was to make slavery illegal. The free black man would not tolerate slavery. Therefore, it came to an end.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, another hidden war that we actually won, but it been hidden, and they made sure they hid this in history. And there are books about the Gullah War, and you might have heard of the Gullah Geechee, still off of the coast of South Carolina. They still exist, the offspring, and these wars really happened. These rebellions happened all the time. What you don't realize is our ancestors never stop fighting. They never stop fighting, ladies and gentlemen. It's just struck out of history so that you don't know that they never took their foot off of the necks of those Caucasoids down in the South. Never, not for one moment. Please leave your comment and subscribe, and if you can, donate to this channel. Thank one of my subscribers, Craig Jarrett, for this story. This story is actually very common down, especially in the southern states, and that's for them to use prison labor at the government mansions and Capitol buildings. This practice has really been going on for centuries down there. Okay, even the White House was staffed with slaves at one point in time, so it's more common than you think. It's just that up here in the north where I am, it's not practiced as much, where they take prison labor and use the prison labor through the government. And this also brings out another point that I would like to make. Their intention was never to let us out of slavery. This is why you still see them using us as the slave labor, even during the 21st century. And it's also why they keep mass incarcerating the very same people they enslaved. After slavery was never over. That's another thing we have to stop saying. We're no longer on the plantation like we used to be, but slavery is by no means over. As soon as we left the plantation, they slapped up all of these prisons because they didn't want to let you go at all. And the fact that they wrote in the Constitution, if you break the law, you have no rights. That shouldn't even be in the Constitution at all. To me, just them saying that in the Constitution is a human rights violation. And it just proves that they never wanted you to get out of slavery, ever. See, the devil never stops doing anything to you. When you start complaining, they just do it a different way, but they still do it. This is just the way these devils operate. Okay, this is just them. This is the way they operate, and they are not going to change this practice. And just from seeing every month, we always see an inmate get released from prison after being in there 20 and 30 years. America never cared about incarcerating innocent people, especially if those innocent people are Black. The reason why they take so long to get them out is because they are using them for this prison labor. Just think about it. All of these corporations now use prison labor to make their products or do any labor for their products. See, they get to pay pennies on the dollar for these inmates to do it, opposed to hiring someone out here that's not in jail. They got a problem with paying money for your labor. This Caucasoid man always had that issue, and he still does. He's got a problem. He always see the Caucasoid race wants something for nothing. And they not only practice that here, but they practice it globally. This is why they'll bomb a country and then get down on the ground and take over the oil fields, take over the poppy fields, or any other resources they have in those countries. He wants something for nothing. And they've been getting something for nothing way too long from us. But this same devil will tell you to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. We have yet to see them do it. We haven't seen them do it even once. We haven't seen this devil even try to do their own labor. If it's not Black people, they try to use the Mexicans. But they don't get out here and do their own labor. They're always looking for somebody else to make a slave out of. You know, it's just like, I remember years ago, especially when we started seeing the Mexicans a lot doing the jobs, I would even hear Caucasoid saying, I would prefer the Mexicans. I would prefer the Mexicans. Yeah, because they always need someone to enslave. And personally, I don't care if they don't want to use Black people for slave work and they prefer to use the Mexicans. But see, one thing you don't realize is all of these foreigners in this country, they ain't gonna be loyal to you, Caucasoid man, woman, and child. You let a war break out in America, they gonna go right back over the border to their countries. And these other people that are in here, they gonna just fly the hell out of here and go back to their countries. Foreigners have no loyalty to you, and they don't care that they have no loyalty to you either. And that's something Black people got to start practicing too in order to break the mental slavery. We got to stop being loyal in the system that has subjugated us, oppressed us, and murdered us. We do not owe 1 ounce of loyalty to this slave nation. America is and always will be a slave nation. It need slavery to survive. It has never stood on her own without slavery, ever. Modern day slavery, many southern states have prison inmates working in governor's mansion and capitol buildings. This is an old tradition, ladies and gentlemen, and it's always been in existence, even during slavery. All right, it was an activist, and he was meeting um, at the governor's mansion in Louisiana. And what happened was, while he was there, he noticed a black man in a jumpsuit, and he was being watched over by a correctional officer, like they always did. You even see this in their movies, where they'll have the white man with a rifle on a horseback, and you'll see the black prisoners um, working the railroad and stuff like that. Um, and you can see this hasn't changed. And he was standing over this black man with his badge and gun. And then he saw another black man come out on the grounds, and he was actually serving white people lunch. And usually they'll have, just to sum it all up, about 20 to 25 inmates working at the Capitol or governor's mansion. And this practice is in about maybe about 7 states altogether: Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Georgia. That's where this is practiced still. Some of the other states, they don't do this, but it was more widely used probably over a century ago, or even 50 years ago. It was more states. Um, and here's the sick thing. When they work up at the Capitol, inmates in Louisiana work in the Capitol are paid anywhere from 2 cents and 20 cents per hour. That's slavery. 2 and 20 cents per hour. And the only ones that are not allowed to be there as an inmate, inmates that have like violent crimes in their background, where they murdered or some type of heinous crime where they might have hurt or injured people. Those are not the inmates they want. See, they want the kind of inmates that are what black people are in jail for, mostly non-violent crimes, a lot of them drug crimes. So they want the non-violent inmate to work on the grounds and inside of the governor's mansion. See, because of what they wrote in the Constitution about you have no rights once you become an inmate, this is just so you can never complain about the human abuses that you're dealing with on a daily basis. So once you get inside of prison, it's not like you can call 911 to help you. You're pretty much screwed. So if you get raped in there or beaten in there, there is really no one for you to call. And in many of these instances, the guards are just not paying attention to a lot of the things that are going on in those prisons. But this practice went all the way back during even the Civil War across the South, where they would have slaves on the grounds of the governor's mansion. And a lot of times, if you remember, I did a video on all of their slave codes and black codes that they would use and pig laws. And this is how a lot of black people got picked up for vagrancy, because, see, they needed the labor around these governor mansions, and they needed the labor back out in the slave field in these plantations, and that's what they used the vagrancy laws for. Kind of like what the vagrancy law of today is resisting arrest. Why are you stopping me? Oh, you look like somebody, you look like a suspect. This is the new one they use all the time. And then when they proceed to try to handcuff you, stop resisting, stop resisting. That's just the new vagrancy of today. You look like somebody, don't resist. Vagrancy laws, modern day vagrancy laws. That's all that is. And of course, also another thing they always had in the South are prison plantations. And you can even see this depicted in some of the movies that they do. You'll see the prisoners all chained up together, what they called the chain gang, doing work out in plantations. And then you always have your typical Caucasoid man that's overseeing the inmates. Nothing has changed. This is exactly how it's done today. So Hillary Clinton actually was recently called out on doing this. I don't know if any of you caught it in the news. And she came up under a lot of scrutiny, of course, but it didn't come out while she was running for president. It came out after the fact. How convenient, right? How convenient. So I'm going to leave the link to this article in the description box so that you can actually read this for yourself. But it's just your typical modern day slavery that's still being carried out in this country. Nothing has changed, ladies and gentlemen. We're just in a different era. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And if you can donate to this channel, please do. Peace, family. You know, so much of our history has been hidden. So many things have been just unspoken about because you have the Caucasoid race that really truly don't want Black people to know how advanced we really are. They want to keep this under wraps and keep talking about some low IQ and all this stuff that really don't matter at the end of the day, because your works matters. And we have a lot of great works that we have done in America. And it's either hidden, or if it is spoken about, it is probably like a paragraph in a history book. But anything they do is greatly exaggerated and overinflated and overrated. But when you go back into history, a Black face just keeps showing up all over the damn place. Why is that? I'll tell you why. We were a highly skilled people in every single area of life. And they knew that when they snatched you and kidnapped your ass and brought you over here to America. They knew what your abilities were, they knew how advanced you were, and they knew what you could do. That's why they sought out a specific Black person. They didn't just go after anybody and snatch them up out of Africa. They wanted a specific group. We had a powerful reputation in the world of being the smartest, and they knew it. It damn sure wasn't their European slaving ass. When I find these stories, it makes me angry. It makes me angry because these same people calling you stupid, they know where a lot of this advancement comes from. It comes from us. The inoculation that's given globally came from an American slave. He said inoculations were done in Africa when we were still in Africa, we were doing inoculations to help people that might have become ill or infected with anything. They used inoculations back in Africa long before this technique was done in America. Medical. So that tells you right there, we were already a medically advanced people. Inoculations were introduced in America by a slave from Africa. This is our ancestor. Not only was this man brilliant, he was very advanced in medicine. I'm sick of these devils talking about they created everything, but when you go in the history, they've created nothing. They didn't create a damn thing. Everything they create got death and destruction tied to it. Guns, bombs, nuclear warheads, and all. Everything they create got nothing but death and destruction attached to it. Everything that our people created was always for the good of humanity. They're a dead culture. That's what they are. They're a dead culture. Everything about these people is surrounded in death. Hell, look at their holidays. Damn near the majority of the holidays they celebrate are about slave masters and death. That's all this country is about. You might have a few other satanic holidays in there, but the majority of the holidays are all about slave masters and death. Memorial Day, that's about death and dying. Independence Day, death and dying. Thanksgiving, death and dying. And all these presidents, nothing but slave masters. I don't celebrate that shit. Or it's on falsehoods. Um, Easter Bunny, and he lays eggs. You know, everything is about fakery and evil and death. But when you read through our inventors, everything is about humanity, making things better for life, everyday living, making a hard job and turning it and making it more simple and more productive to do. That's what comes from us. Nothing but evil comes from them. This damn story needs to go viral. I'm serious. We need to share this story over and over and over and over. This story should get 1,000 shares. And fuck Black History Month. We honor our people year round when we're good and ready to do it. We ain't gonna honor our people for 1 month and move on. We're gonna honor them all fucking year, every year, over and over. I'm gonna put the spotlight on this particular brother, our people. that came out of West Africa and brought here to America, who was a brilliant man and very advanced in medicine, who taught a group of inferior pale people what inoculation was, because they had no clue to what it was until it was introduced to them by this man who was Hebrew just like us. We honor the true father of inoculation and wonder if you knew the vaccines that keep diseases away was brought to the Americas by a slave. This white demon didn't create nothing. What they did was combine Chinese medicine and African medicine together and then claim they created medicine. That's how they did it, ladies and gentlemen. They didn't create shit. Few details are known about the birth of Onesimus, but it is assumed he was born in Africa in the late 17th century before eventually landing in Boston. So in other words, he was snatched, kidnapped out of Africa. Let's say it the right way. Stop sugarcoating the shit. He was snatched out of Africa and brought over here to the Americas, right here in North America where the slaves were. He landed here. No, he didn't. He was kidnapped out of Africa and brought here against his will. One of 1,000 people of African descent living in the Massachusetts colony. Now remember, slavery was more all over America. It wasn't just in some damn South. That's another lie they have perpetuated all throughout the centuries. So this brother was in Massachusetts. Onesimus was a gift to the Puritan church minister Cotton Mather from his congregation in 1706. Onesimus told Mather about the centuries-old tradition of inoculation practice in Africa. But I thought we didn't have a language and we didn't know how to do, we were swinging on trees. You see the lies these devils tell you? We were very advanced people. By extracting the material from an infected person and scratching it into the skin of an unaffected person, you would deliberately introduce smallpox to the healthy individual, making them immune. This came from a black man. Considered extremely dangerous at the time, Cotton Mather convinced Dr. Zebdel Boyson, oh, okay, some dumb cockazoid doctor, that's all, to examine with the procedure when a smallpox epidemic hit Boston in 1721 and over 240 people were inoculated. Opposed to politically, religiously, and medically in the United States and abroad, public reaction to the experiment put Mather and Boyson lives in danger despite records indicating that only 2% of the patients requesting inoculation died compared to 15% of the people not inoculated who contracted smallpox. I wish he would have just let them all die from smallpox, helping the most ungrateful people on the whole earth. Onesimus, traditional African practice, was used to inoculate American soldiers during the Revolutionary War and introduced the concept of inoculation to the United States. You know how huge this is? Many of us have gone to hospitals and doctor's office and been inoculated, and you have no clue that you getting a shot, even a flu shot, came from a black man. He told them how inoculation was done. If it was not for this man, do you know how many dead people would have been in this fucking country? I wish he would have just let them die and just do it on our people only. The world would be a better place. These devils didn't advance nothing. All of the advancements came from us. It all came from us. America would be a third world country if we were not here. These devils didn't do nothing. And don't come to my channel talking about you racist, because I'm going to erase all that mess. I don't want to hear from any of you devils coming here talking about some racist. You created races. You built a whole nation on it. Don't come to me talking that crap. I will erase you. And don't come talking about some Dr. Martin Luther King either, when your asses killed him. Don't talk to me about that crap. And don't talk to me about no fucking IQ test when the shit had to be revised 7 times before you could pass it. Don't come to me talking about that shit. All that mess is going to be erased. Don't waste your time. Please leave your comments and subscribe. And if you can donate to this channel, please do. Peace, family. Next bit of history that I'm about to bring you is about the Deacons for Defense. Okay, the Deacon for Defense was very important to the Black community. Deacons for Defense provided protection when no one else would. Just like no one is interested in protecting the Black community now, this also took place in our past. Now, how did the Deacons for Defense come about? Well, they came about because of all the harassing that the Klan would do in the Black community. And if you know history, you would also be fully aware of the fact that the Klan would come in the Black community, terrorize it, burn homes down. They would snatch Black men out of their houses, kick the door in, snatch them out of their houses, and beat and lynch them. So they were men that were veterans. They were made up of World War II and Korean War veterans that were Black. that decided to step up to the plate and protect the Black neighborhood, because the FBI would start, they, just like any other Black organization, they start spying on the Deacons for Defense. But we're going to get into this article that came out in USA Today on February 6, 2016. The home of the late civil rights activist Robert Hicks received a state historic marker in 2014, and it was recognized on the National Register of Historic Places in 2015. Now his family is working to transform the home into a civil rights museum. Hicks was the leader of the Deacons for Defense and Justice in the 1960s, a grassroots self-defense force that protected the civil rights workers and African Americans trying to register to vote. And that got put under FBI surveillance because of it. Barbara Hicks Collins, the activist's daughter, says the journey to making her father's home a museum started with getting a street name for her father's 4 months after his death in 2010. Then came the state historic marker and the National Register. We're one step closer to completing honoring my father, she said. This is just another accomplishment along the way. Hicks Collins said the process has suffered minor setbacks because the home has been repeatedly vandalized. And I don't need to tell you who the vandals are, because this is a group that stood up to the Klan. The family planned to have the home rewired and security cameras installed. A contractor also told that the home's foundation and roof needed work before the project could move forward. In the meantime, the family's civil rights work will be featured in an exhibit at the Smithsonian Institute Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. The museum is scheduled to open in September. All right, the museum is already open. So, this article is kind of old, but the Deacons for Defense would stand up in many cases also to the Ku Klux Klan. And how did they do it? They would outnumber them. They would outnumber and outgun them. So let's say if the Klan came around and it was 10 of them, it would be 50 Deacons for Defense, and they would back down. Okay. And, although we don't revere gangs like we used to back in the day, gangs came about to keep the Klan out of the Black neighborhood. And see, years ago, the gangs would protect the neighborhoods. I know they fight over drugs and territory and all that stuff now, but that's not how it started out. So they had a whole different mindset on protecting their neighborhood. So the Deacons for Defense played a very pivotal role. They also protected Dr. King during his last few marches. He stopped talking all that nonviolent stuff and started turning to the Nation of Islam and also the Deacons for Defense, because he had started changing after being harassed and attacked and family threatened. He started changing his tune away from all that nonviolence talk. But I have a video right here that I want you to listen to, and it's about these are the actual members of the Deacons for Defense telling you what the experience was like. Let me go ahead and roll this video.
The Deacons for Defense and Justice, commonly known as the Deacons, was a little-known civil rights African-American group which made its mark mainly here in Louisiana and in southern Mississippi cities from 1964 until the end of that tumultuous decade. The Deacons for Defense had its genesis in the lumber mill community of Jonesboro, Louisiana in 1964. I'm Ward Cooling, a graduate student at Louisiana State University, and I'm going to introduce you to some amazing men and let them tell you their stories.
Okay, right here, this building here is the old Masonic Lodge. It's where the Deacons started out, where we had our first meetings. We had meetings at several other places, but that was one of the major places we had meetings because of the fact we couldn't have meetings everywhere. We had at some of the churches, but that's basically where the Deacons got started here in this old building. And that was in the early 64. And the reason for us organizing the Deacons because we had a lot of people from up north was here to help us with our voters registration and to help us with a lot of other Jim Crow things that was going on during this time. And they didn't have any police protection because the police was trying to do everything they could against them because they didn't want them here. So we felt like if they come this far, risk their lives and their future to help us, we should do the same for them.
The primary goal for Louisiana's Deacons for Defense was to protect black sections of towns and civil rights activists, black and white, from those who did not want to see integration succeed and who did not hesitate to use violent acts to stop it. The Deacons armed themselves and made it clear that this sort of intimidation was going to stop one way or the other. And for the most part, the Klan backed down when confronted. If you have not heard of them, you aren't alone. The group is not discussed in high school history classes. It grew to include chapters in a dozen Louisiana and southern Mississippi cities. The Deacons acted only in defensive roles and only when provoked. In fact, only one white man was ever shot, and that was by accident. He also lived. The Deacons, whose overall membership probably never exceeded 200, was also very instrumental in marches, sit-ins, integration efforts, voter registration moves, and other key African American movements during the civil rights. Although their visibility faded by 1970, about a dozen of these men still live in Louisiana and keep in contact with one another.
Deacons of Defense. If you read this Lance Hill's book, Deacons for Defense, he spells out when the Deacons were formed. They were formed one night in Jonesboro. Mike Les and I had gone out on the highway, and from Jonesboro to Monroe. And we got on the highway, 3 carloads of whites began to trail us. And telling Mike, we know about the 3 boys in Mississippi. We're just not going to die out here between these 2 swamps. That was the night we played chicken with the Ku Klux Klan.
The Deacons Defense wasn't that we were advocating violence, but we were a self-protection organization that defended our community. We weren't going to put up with the nonsense of the Ku Klux Klan and other races who wanted to, in other places they burned, murdered, and lynched, and we weren't going to tolerate it.
The Deacons were basically, just as I explained to you before, the ones that would take these weapons and defend the citizens, and that's what we did for ourselves as well as for others. We would take it on ourselves to arm ourselves and to make sure that we were given proper protection, because homes were being bombed and burned, and nothing has been done about it.
I was more of a self-defense and protecting our community and voting, registering people to vote, and trying to make the system that we live in better.
Well, I would think the hardened part of the Deacons was like anybody else. I'd say that enough is enough. They are men with families, children, families as such, and they're men. You know, they're not shirt tails, as they say. They're not Uncle Toms. They are men. They would do whatever it takes.
A lot of them were World War II and Korean War veterans. They loved their country. They wanted to enjoy it, and they wanted their children and their grandchildren to be able to enjoy it. With a lot of them went over to Europe and Korea and fought for it. That was the freedom of their community.
We found a purpose greater than ourselves. And that's when you get caught up in something. Get caught up in the wind. And you're guided by a force you cannot see. And once in it, the question is, when can we stop? When should we stop? You know, and the answer to that was when victory is won. So it was either continuing until victory, and in many cases until death.
During the weekend, the young whites would come in the community and they would be drinking, and when they finished drinking, they used to come through the neighborhood and, you know, yell the N word and do different things in the community. And so on the weekends, we basically had a 1960 Infada. You know, we had our bricks and rocks when they would come through. You know, with that nonsense, you know, we were actually we were rocking. You know, we were hitting them, throwing rocks and bricks. You know, trying to retaliate to them for the things that they were doing. If they caught you walking along in our community or walking outside the community, a lot of times they would attack you.
Well, I think one in particular was the bombings. That's when everybody was up in arms, as we'd say. Well, not really up in arms, but that's when they were maddest. Okay, that's when everybody was really ready to take them on. You know, and of course,
bombings. What do you mean?
The bombing of houses, of homes. You know, I mean, these people actually go around throwing Molotov cocktails into your windows, into your porches, or wherever they can get close enough to throw it, to burn your house and to burn whoever's in there. They didn't care. So that's when the deacons or the protective forces would take their most stand is at that point, because everything was hottest at that point.
5,000 students of Southern started marching down on December 21st, 1961. And that demonstration was broken up with tear gas and fire hoses and dogs. 21 of us went to jail. I was one of the 21 in jail with Dave Dennis, Weldon Rujo, the Army Bailey. We spent the Christmas in jail, the Christmas of 61, in jail in Baton Rouge. And then the president of Southern, Pelticar, was ordered by the Board of Education to expel us from school. So we were expelled from the university.
When we pulled up, I was in the car with Sam Bond and Charles Sam. We were all the three that went up there first. And Charles Sam asked me to lay my pistol down and go in there and get him and walk out with him. Now, Charles Sam was if you heard him speak, he was very convincing in the speech. And, but my choice of confidence that Sam Boyd wouldn't leave me. You know, I had that kind of confidence no matter what the odds were. And Sam Vaughn told me, see, you can leave your God and go in there because I knew he had his. And he was going to back me up, whatever. When I walked in the door, before I got inside, I could hear them laughing because they felt like they had opponents, you know. And when I walked in that door, all of the laughter stopped and got as quiet. You could hear the pin drop. And one of the claimants said, here come them damn Dickens. And Fletcher Anderson and Lake Griffin got up and walked out. And that's the thing I really remember most about Sam was a very bold and brave individual. We had history where you had a march that was longer than Selma to Montgomery from Bogalusa to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And very hostile territory. And but you don't hear that much about it. Sherrod Sims was the president of the Deacons, and he was the voice of the Deacons. When you start talking about the boldness of a deacon that didn't have any fear, you was Sam Barnes, Rowan Burris, you know, the Bertrand Wise. You had a lot of the older guys that they didn't have any fear. I started out as a protester. I was a street soldier, I guess you would say, in the Deacon's Defense of Justice. I was one of the younger members.
And how old were you at this time?
In 1964, I hadn't made 17 yet. I was 16.
I was one of the persons who felt that it was unfair practice and that unless we stood up and showed that we did not agree with it and that we would go whatever extent it takes to stop it. And that's what we did.
You know, they kept it under wraps because I was underage, but I was an armed deacon. I did mobile patrols with them, patrolling the neighborhood. I also pulled guard and built various homes of civil rights leaders and homes where people in our community were housing the civil rights workers that's came to Bogalusa.
Well, I think the deacons, for instance, is serve their purpose, and right now, the Supreme Court and the courts of land are listening. So now you don't need them. See, this was sort of a way that you could feel safe as can be, because you knew then that after you've tried everything you can try, you still had another leverage, another means of protecting yourself somewhat. But now you don't need that because if something should happen, you got the media, you got you guys, you got people that's going to talk. Back then, you wouldn't say that because you wouldn't be allowed to. They would kill you too.
But the number of deacons, you know, that was secret. That was you might look for us in one spot and we'll pop up somewhere else. You know, wherever it was a hot spot, deacons had a habit of showing up. You know, and that's where we were effective at.
Well, I think now the deacons are basically the youth. I mean, the young folks now are not going to take what these old folks took back then, and they know that. So they know you come, you better come right to because they out there. They ain't going to take it now. But back then, the people were afraid. I mean, they really were. I mean, and they had every right to be because they had been mistreated so long, so bad, until they felt there was no other recourse. They had to take it. But now, the young people knowing that, you bleed like me, so don't try it.
You still have some of the ones in my group, my age group, and some of them are older still now, but they got a younger group. They listen to what we've told them, and they already have their ideas, and they're willing to lay down and defend their community. And so, we're not, I say, the mass. We're just laying semi-dominant. If the need arises, they're there.
The hardened kernel of a deacon is somebody that will stand up. Stand up. I mean, go to court, go to appeals, go to whatever means that the law provides to get a point across. And once you have been given a decision of the land, then you got to live by it.
Well, some of them were known, some of them didn't try to have it. Like, you had your president, he was a spokesman, Charles Sam. He was a spokesman, so his face was out there. And I never tried to have it. You had some that they were low key, but the authorities and the Klan, they knew who some of them were, like Rowan Boris or others. People like Rowan, they didn't have, Fletcher Anderson, but they didn't have it. They were Klan. Sam Barnes, we call him the Klan, another Klan.
I felt that I was doing what was right, and I didn't do anybody any harm. I did not, and I still don't hold any animosity or any grudge against any of those white folks. I don't know any of them that I hate for what they did. I do believe that they did what they did because they thought they were doing the right thing.
It's not up to us anymore. It's up to each generation to see what needs to happen and step up to the plate. You cannot, this generation cannot parade on Martin Luther King's Day and think that they're doing something.
Got a lot of different archives. I know that University of California, Berkeley has a lot of information, and they have a museum, I think, it's got a lot of archives in Harlem, in New York. And Johnson's publications should have a lot. But I would ask a lot of our young students to do research and look it up and let the story be told, because the Deacons for Defense movie that Forrest Whitaker now did, it was not always factual, but there was a lot of fiction in it also.
Young Afro-American men, I think today, need to read our book of Deacon for Defense, and they will get a lot out of reading it, because it goes back to where all this started, and it would show them where we came from, and where we are now, and somewhere down the road they we lost a little ground, but still, if they would read it and consider trying to help to do something about it, we could come back and really do a lot more in this respect. But the book is one of the most important things. They need to read it. And, the movie, which it's okay, but I think you need to read the book. There's nobody to really talk to about it, because it's not that many of us left to talk to. But the main thing is get the book and read it. And when you read it, so you need to read something more than one time to really understand it. You need to read it about 3 times. We make sure that you understand it and know what we went through and how much hell we went through at that time trying to get to where we are now.
Okay. You can watch the full movie on the Deacons for Defense. It is online, and you can, I did come across it. It's over, I think it's like an hour and a half, maybe a little longer. But it's definitely there if you want to get more of an understanding of who the Deacons for Defense were. This is an FBI report, just like any other Black organization. When you have notoriety and you are known, and because these were armed Black men, they were under a surveillance watch by the FBI. The reason why I admire this group, they were one of the few groups of Black men that were armed that got the Klan to back down. They kept their asses in check. 200 Black men that were fully armed got the Klan down there in Louisiana to back down out of fear. And like I said, they would outnumber the Klan. See, it would only be, let's say, like about 5 of them going to a Black person's house to cause a problem. So it would be 20 Deacons of Defense that would be there to combat them. So because they were always outnumbered and outgunned, they would back down from even dealing with the Deacons for Defense. They realized they had some real deep competition dealing with these Black men. And like I said, they were veterans from the Korean War and World War II. And some of them were young guys that just wanted to be part of it. But really, if you get a chance, watch the movie that's on YouTube about the Deacons for Defense. Forrest Whitaker is the leading actor in the whole thing. And it's really a good movie. Please leave your comments and subscribe. And if you can donate to this channel, please do. Peace, family. A history fact that many people may not know: most lynchings in America took place on a Sunday afternoon when these hybrid devils got out of church. And it goes real deep. And we're going to get into how this blood ritual was done. And from start to the end, it is very, very evil. There is no way to pretty up this situation. It was evil. There's no way humans could have done this. This had to be a hybrid animal to do these things to our ancestors. Lynchings were some of the most heinous things that ever happened to Black men, women, and children in this country. Not only did these devils do the lynchings after church, they sent out invitations in advance, inviting people to the lynchings, inviting the entire town. They would send out invitations and post flyers, and they would also put the invite on the front page of the newspaper, so the word got out to a large segment of the population in those towns. I just can't imagine what it would have been like for our ancestors in that last moment of their life, being surrounded by nothing but devils, and just seeing the face of devils on their way out and to their death. All the torture and blood and cutting off the penis and cutting their ears and their fingers off is disgusting. And we have to make sure our history, no matter how horrifying it is, it does not die. Because, see, our enemy, they want to put in the history book that we were migrant workers. We migrated over here. And we were volunteer workers and all this nonsense that they're trying to now change how slavery was done and make it seem that black presence in this country was voluntary. We can't let that happen. We can't. It would do such another major injustice to our ancestors, and we shouldn't let that happen. This really happened to them. It's real, and it's sick. Sunday afternoon, everybody participated in it, including the pastors, these white pastors. You know, it must be a reason why throughout my entire life I could never really listen to a Caucasoid pastor. I don't know what it was. It was just almost like something disturbing my spirit, and I just never could do it. And I tried to do it a couple of times back when I was a Christian, but I would get maybe like 10 minutes into their sermon and I would have to shut it off. Something just kept disturbing my spirit and I just couldn't get through it. And then when I started learning about the lynchings, most of them in the country took place on a Sunday afternoon after they got out of church. Maybe it was just something, the ancestors just letting me know, you better turn that shit off. When I go through the history, it's very hurtful. It's hurtful that somebody would even think of doing something this evil to a human being. But it did happen. And don't ever let anybody try to take your history away from you. Because retribution is coming to these people. Make no mistake about it. It's coming. But anybody that opens their mouth and tells you to forget your history, that's an evil person. That's evil. Only evil would say that to you. Get rid of that person immediately. If it's a black person, because unfortunately we have a lot of deeply mentally enslaved black people that also repeat those things. Again, get rid of those people, because anytime you want to talk about your past, they're only going to be around to try to shut you down. You can't have that going on. You have every right to speak about your history without anybody trying to disrupt you or trying to be evil around you as you're trying to talk about your history, and remember and reflect on it. American history is lynchings. It's very deeply ingrained in the history, whether these hybrids like it or not. And these same evil ancestors that did these things raised them. And then they had offspring and raised them. And I'm not going to trust them because I see the evil that they came from. Most people know little to nothing about this period of American history. Lynching and its horrors are not covered in our nation's textbooks, nor are they acknowledged or even lamented by the broader church. This unfortunate reality has left the Black church isolated in its grief over the reality that during a 50-year period ranging from 1890 to 1940, approximately 5,500 African Americans were documented as lynch victims. But I want you to pay close attention to the word documented. There were many that were lynched, and it was undocumented. Okay, not all lynchings were documented. Some were. Yes, but there were plenty that were done, and it was not documented at all. Lynchings reached its peak in 1892, shortly after Reconstruction, with 155 African Americans lynched in this year alone. In fact, the practice of lynching was so widespread, the Tuskegee Institute, a predominantly Black institute in Alabama, decided in 1881 to begin issuing annual reports on the incidence of lynchings within the country. And it was not until 1952 that the institution was able to report that there was not a single lynching to report within a given year. Popular belief holds that lynchings only occurred in the South. However, while lynching was particularly prevalent in the South, it was not exclusively a Southern horror, but was one of the enacted as far as north and west as Minnesota, Illinois, California, and Oregon. And that was another falsehood, ladies and gentlemen, that I learned in school. I had Caucasoid female teachers that lied, because I'm not going to say they taught me anything. They lied. They stood in front of my class every day and lied and said that the lynchings only occurred in the South. As I grew up and started reading more, I realized that it went on in many states across the country, not just the South. Okay? You got to understand, these Caucasoids are trying to shield themselves from everything that they've done to us. They don't want you to know. They want to tell you as little as possible, and that little bit they do tell you is usually riddled with all kinds of lies. Major reason why lynching is connected to Christianity is that most lynchings actually occurred on Sunday afternoons, shortly after church services concluded. After Sunday services were let out, these executions were well attended by Christians. See, this is another reason why once I got away from Christianity, there were too many of these Caucasoids in the past and present that are Christians. And in my life, I'm speaking from my experience, these are the most evil of them all. Every time I met a Caucasoid man or male or female that told me they were Christians, they always ended up being the nastiest Caucasoids I ever met in my life. Those are the ones that are more likely to call you a nigger, try to do some harm to you, or claim that they are your friend, and they will go in the boss's office to tell a lie on you to get you in trouble, because this is their evil nature. It's just part of who they are. Most of these executions were based on lies. All right. What do they do when the Becky wants to accuse a black guy of a rape? She lies. You know why? Because she got that shit from her forefathers. Her ancestors put all that shit in her head, telling her she can lie on one of us and get away with it. This is why to this day, they still will pin crimes that they did on black people. They will still accuse black people of rape. They will still go to the boss and make some lie up about you on the job just to get you in trouble, because this is their nature. This is who they are. This is what's taught to them. That's all taught behavior. That's why you keep seeing it repeat itself through the generations. They teach that stuff to their children. They teach it. Okay? You're not seeing it for no reason. All right? So let's move on. This is really tough. This harsh reality is not only beyond frightening, but it also serves to prove the necessity of beginning this conversation. In fact, many of those believers who were present at lynchings did not consider themselves to be racist. Okay? What do most Caucasoids tell you? Oh, I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist, but they clearly are. So these hybrids went to lynchings and did not consider themselves a racist because in their mind, the racists were the ones actually conducting the lynching. So if they stood there as a spectator, they weren't a racist. now, if that don't make you laugh, nothing will. These individuals would avoid the stigma of racism and the conviction of the Holy Spirit by rationalizing their presence as purely spectators. Now, don't they always try to get out of racism even to this day? Again, taught behavior, y'all. Taught behavior. Arguing that they just happened to be present at the scene of the hanging, which in their minds did not make them culpable. Aren't they not guilty for everything they do, including the murders of Black people? Okay, they're not guilty. They didn't do nothing wrong. So you can see how far back they've been taking on that not guilty nature about themselves. Lynchings were photographed and turned into postcards, which would then be used to promote future lynchings. People would send these postcards to their friends, inviting them to attend the next lynching, as if it was like a social gathering. Oh, come on out. We're going to gather together, have some dinner, and watch a Black man get lynched. They would do that that's why they had the picnic. They would sit at the picnic tables with their food and their drinks, and they would watch a Black man holler and scream and get tortured as they ate and smiled and was entertained by it. Watching a Black man get tortured and they just sitting there enjoying their food and their drink. And another thing they would do is bring their children. You know why they brought their children? Because they were trying to show their children, see, these Black people are inferior. See how inferior they are? According to historian, lynching, which also frequently including burning, castration, and disfiguring the victim, were spectacles announced in advance, attended by whites, including women and children, and covered on assignment by newspaper reporters in a manner not unlike contemporary coverage of sporting events. So you get to see now how far back the media has always demonized us. And it goes all the way back to lynchings. And even before then, even during slavery. The most disturbing part about this spiritual spirituality, is that people would self-identify as Christians played a significant role in these events, in both the promotion and execution of lynchings. So Sunday, church, and Christianity are all linked to lynching. Believers' lack of values and ethical response to God's love was so non-existent that it was commonly accepted within the last 100 years of this nation to watch someone be tortured, burned, castrated, and killed for sport just because of the color of their skin. Moreover, one's faith was thought to have nothing to do with the coming to the defense of these helpless victims. So they called themselves Christians. They said they loved and believed in God, but they did nothing to help that Black victim. That doesn't sound very Christian-like to me. In fact, one's faith did not even prohibit Christians from participating as enthusiastic observers within crowds. Therefore, it was normative for infants and children to be taken by their parents to see these spectacle lynchings. So they were just normalizing this for their children. And then those little devil kids would grow up and do the same thing to Black people. Imagine the psychological trauma of growing up seeing this sort of barbarism on a semi-regular basis. This had to have had a profound impact on these young minds. No, it didn't. They grew up and just followed in their mother and father's footsteps and helping in lynching. And the white women don't get a pass. When a lot of these burnings took place, the white women were the ones that provided the kerosene to burn the Black man, women, and children in. She was the provider of the kerosene. So don't try to say she was so far removed. See, the men that want to date these devils, they want to act like these women were so far removed from all this stuff. No, they weren't. They were very much involved. And you women that date these white men, you need to be bitch slapped and hung. I have no empathy for you when those relationships fall apart. I don't feel sorry for you. You ain't nothing but a slave in those relationships anyway. After all these things these devils have done, how the hell can you lay down with them? Okay, I can forgive a swirler that walk away from it and never go back. But some of these people, they just go from one white man and woman to the next until they find one that they can marry. You're disgusting. How can anybody respect that after hearing all of this? I don't even respect you. Being taken to public executions where African Americans were looked upon as a kind of game animal to be caught and executed for pleasure, had to permanently hallmark the image of the Black inferiority with the young, impressionable minds of children. No, their kids grew up just as hateful. Believe me, there's a lot of racist children. And you hear this from the public schools. Every now and then you'll see an incident take place in a public school that happened to go public. These kids already got that racism from their parents. Believe me, they're not traumatized from it. They enjoy it. They're not traumatized at all. The remnants of racism that exist within our society, many of which have become institutionalized, have to be understood in relations to the reverberation effects of the trauma of the lynching tree. Although racism today seeks to hide behind the institutionalized manifestations, which makes the facade of colorblindness a tempting one of many citizens, it is our inability to talk about race, to confront the legacy of the lynching tree, which forces us to deal with the country's history of Black bodies swinging from trees, which undergirds the existence of racism in the US today. No, we don't need any more conversations about race. I hear so many people saying that. We just need to separate from these hybrids. They have showed us over and over they hate us. They're still lynching us by way of the police, and nothing has changed, ladies and gentlemen. It's not going to change because they are happy with our subjugation. They don't want it to change. Mental slavery is the only thing that needs to end among Black people. We got to get out of this mindset of believing that somehow we still need to be connected to the very people that did this to our ancestors. No, we don't. We don't need them. It's psychological warfare they're playing on you by trying to make you believe that. It's about as fake as they are. They had to keep killing our ancestors over and over because they were prospering without them. So how could it be true that you need them? I brought this story up. This came out in the New York Times, February 10th, 2015, because this is what the devil wants to do as far as doing something for the Black community. And I said this belongs in the nearest garbage dump that it should go. They want to take the names of the Black victims of lynchings in this country and construct a memorial, a lynching memorial. No defense, but who the fuck needs a lynching memorial? How is a lynching memorial going to help us? That's not what we need. We can remember our history on our own without the help of caucasoids. We don't need their help to remember our history, ladies and gentlemen. We don't need a lynching memorial. We don't need it. But this is what they're proposing to do. They want to erect markers and memorials. We don't need a lynching memorial, ladies and gentlemen. We don't. If they want to do something for the Black community, give us land, give us reparations, give us things that we can use in our lives today. We don't need no damn lynching memorial. That's not going to help not one Black person in this country. Not one Black person is going to be helped by no damn lynching memorial. So, hybrid America, you can shove your lynching memorial. But here's a map that shows most of the places where lynching took place, the heaviest places in the country. But by no means all of the lynchings were not done here. This is just where it was the most concentrated. You know, I heard about the lynching memorial back in 2015 and I chuckled and laughed and I was like, you devils just, you don't know what to do with yourselves. But we don't need a lynching memorial, ladies and gentlemen. We don't need it. We don't need it, especially from them. We can remember our history in our own way. Now, What led to a lot of the lynchings? The lynchings, even the FBI said to this day, were based on lies. Some devil woke up one day and decided to make up a story that they knew would get the white mobs all up in a big uh, tizzy, and they would go out there and snatch up any random black guy to lynch. And actually, these weren't random black guys. They would do this to business owners. But let's look at some of the crimes that black people were accused of between the 1900s and 1964. All right. This one was 1892. A young American female raped. Mobs of thousands descend on prison and seized on Negro. It never happened. These are all based on lies. 1893, 4-year-old white girl raped, then slowly tortured to death. Okay, frenzy, American mob burns Negro at the stake. (1899) Negro burnt at the stake, attempted to massacre an entire family. None of these things happened, ladies and gentlemen. These are all lies. 1900, 16-year-old girl raped. Lie. 1900, Negro goes to white home, puts on puppy dog act, and begs for food. He's fed, then rapes housewife. Didn't happen. 1900, armed Negro awaits until adult male leaves his home to go to work his farm field. Negro then barrage into home and viciously beats and rape his wife. She's left for dead. Didn't happen. All of these are based on lies. Okay. Even the FBI said when they investigated some of these lynchings, they found no crime. This is all shit these caucasoids made up, ladies and gentlemen. All lies. Negro, and you're going to see white female come up over and over. They have been using the white woman to use as a means of torturing and killing black people, as you can see, for centuries. And they still do it to this day. You let anything break in the news about some black guy doing something to some white girl, they go into a frenzy even to this day. And they got a long history of just lying their asses off. And a lot of these crimes were committed by caucasoids and pinned on black men, black businessmen. Sheriff gunned down by Negro who refused to pay taxes. All right, another lie. Lynch raped by white female. You see how much they keep bringing up the white female and, oh, housewife raped. Oh, here's another rape right here. Murder of a white man and all this stuff. I even watched a movie. I can't remember the name of this movie. I was a child at the time, where they lynched a black man in the movie. And it was supposedly over a white man that he killed. And then the white man showed up at the lynching and they all started laughing. The one that he supposedly had killed. He came to the lynching. Negro rapes white female. Okay, and so you're going to see this. I'm going to leave the link to this in the description box. All right. And some of this where a family massacred, claim a Negro massacred the entire family. These things didn't happen, ladies and gentlemen. But this just go to show you all of the lies they have made up in order to get Black men, women, and children lynched in this country. And you can see they even used the term Black supremacy back in the 1900s. So when you hear them say Black supremacy, even they're still digging up things from centuries ago and still using it now. All right, so I just wanted you to see this. And again, I will leave this link in the description box so that you can look through it yourself. All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right. They used to also send invites to the lynchings. All right. Here's one right here. Right, in the Ku Klux Klan. And they would send these invitations out, and the invites would be to lynchings. The invites would also be in newspapers and in flyers. And in this case, you can see this was a newspaper where they announced the lynching of a Black man by a mob at 5 o'clock this afternoon. This is how the crowds came out, because they would be invited to show up to these lynchings. All right. And these invites were gone out all over the South. All right. Here's another invite to an execution. So these things happened all the time. And it's a shame. But this is the history and legacy of America. But invites to lynchings would go out. They would be on flyers, or they would have these little invitation cards, or they would have these fairs and picnics and invite everybody to come out and come out to the public lynching. Here's a Negro publicly whipped for assaulting women by a Delaware jailer. And then they would have all the information to invite you, or a Negro was lynched and burned, Negro burned at the stake. These people are sick. And don't look at the ones, the Caucasoids that you're looking at today. They were raised by these people. Come on. How could they not be racist? Get out of here with that. They're not a racist. Get out of here with that shit. And just look at the stuff they write. 3,000 Negroes will burn. And all these people are sick. They're out of their minds. Here's another execution invite. And these were a lot of times the Black businessmen mainly. And sometimes they do husband and wife. I have a friend, and her family was from Maryland. And the reason why they're here in New Jersey now is because her grandparents were taken out in the woods, and they were shot to death by the Klan. And after that happened, her family moved up here to New Jersey. So I have come across a few people, along with, what happened to my grandfather at the hands of the Klan trying to get a hold of him to kill him. So, we still exist. There's a lot of us that are still around, that have incidents in our families. We're not dead. They probably wish we were dead, but we're not. Here's a man that was lynched, and you can see the coffin. And in many cases, they would not even allow the family to even do a little funeral for them. They would just put them in a wooden box and throw them in the ground. No regard, no nothing. You can tell these are the most unspiritual hybrid entities you ever want to see in your life. And you can see right here in the photo, His pants are down because he was castrated. And this is more likely a black businessman they did this to. Whenever you see the sheet and the pants are down or completely removed, the castration took place. A lot of times they cut the ears and the fingers off, sometimes even toes. Here's another man that was lynched. These pictures are disgusting. And again, more than likely a businessman, since 90% of them were businessmen that were living and minding their own damn business. And then these devils came along and lynched them. Now, I showed these two men in the past, but what I didn't do, I did not explain. The reason why they have these two men wrapped around a tree like this is because they were raped before they were killed. More than likely, they were gang raped and then shot in the back of the head after they got finished raping them. This is very common. If you look, like this one man right here, he's nude. All right. That means they were raped. And this is how they would do it. They would chain them onto a tree and then strip them down. And they would be in like a kneeling position and they would come up and rape them. It's sick. And sometimes they would just rip the back of the pants and they would also cut the back of the pants out and just rape them. So that was also done. This is a man that they were getting him ready for burial after being lynched. These are some pictures that you probably never seen before. It's not real common to see these pictures of people after they were lynched, but you can see how badly mangled his face was. And they said his body was badly mangled. That's why it was covered up from being beaten and tortured, and then he was lynched. I tell you, I cannot love these people. I don't care what anybody say. This is a photograph of, you can see two coffins here. These were two black men that were lynched together up in a tree, and their families were burying them after the lynching was over. And this was down in Georgia. This is the postcard that these devils would send out to each other, family and friends all across the country. They proud of killing black men, and they wanted to show their work that they did down in the South, because this is as close as they did to work in the South, because their asses didn't do nothing. Black people did all the work, and all they did was try to entertain themselves through lynchings. Like it said, this was a sporting event for them. They all came out. Men, women, children, babies, they didn't care. They all went out to enjoy it. Here's another postcard. And in a lot of cases on the postcard, they would be inviting you to the next lynching on the postcard. Invitation to the next lynching. Some sick ass shit. Here's another lynching. This man, his name was Willie James. What they did to this man was beyond sick. Willie James was killed. They cut his head off, put his head on a stake, and then set his head on fire. So beheadings also took place, just like on Black Wall Street. Some of the people they killed were beheaded. So that beheading that we saw from out of Jackson, Mississippi, this country has a history of beheading Black men. They have a history of it already. And he died, I believe, in 1909. They killed him. It was disgusting. And they showed all these different pictures of their, I guess, of each stage of when they had them and then they killed them. And this was also a postcard showing Willie James. And then last but not least, here's another postcard. These people were sick and they're still sick. And just remember, the offspring of the people that are in your courthouses and their grandparents and some of these elders that you see walking out here that are Caucasoids, they were raised by the people that did this shit. And then they had families and raised the next generation and the next generation. So it should be no wonder why racism has never gone anywhere in America, and it ain't going to go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. It's never going anywhere. All I can do is pray to the Most High that He not only bring judgment on these devils that did this to our ancestors and continue to do this stuff to us today, but give our people the wisdom to finally wake up and see these hybrid demonic devils for what they are. No good is ever going to come from these devils. I don't expect nothing good from them. That way I'm never disappointed, because I was never expecting anything decent from them in the first place. There's no way you can be raised by the devils that did this kind of stuff and you turned out not to be a racist devil yourself. It just can't happen. There are maybe, I would say, 1% of them that may not be racist, but the rest of them damn sure is. It is such a minute amount, it ain't even funny. That's why they can't really do anything about it, because their numbers are so few where they can turn the hearts and minds of the people around. They can't. They are happy with hating you, ladies and gentlemen. They think it's nothing wrong with it. They were taught in their families it's nothing wrong with them being racist and hating you. And then they pass that to the next generation and the next and the next. And then here you are in 2017, still witnessing the execution of Black men out in public at the hands of the very same people that lynched our forefathers. Nothing's changed. We're just in a different era. This is why no justice will ever come out of any court. And no devil will ever oppose the cops that carried out the execution. Separation is the only way to our sanity and our prosperity. We cannot be connected with these people anymore. If anything, we need a divorce from Caucasoids. We need to get rid of them. Anytime somebody does this to your ancestors, they mean you nothing good. And then they're writing on this damn postcard talking about the Negro they lynched. You motherfuckers can go to hell. I never want you back in my life ever again. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And if you can donate to this channel, please do. Peace, family. You know, when I was little, I saw this movie, Othello, and I remember sitting there looking at my mom and saying, why do they have this white man painted up as a black man? You know, this movie was already old by the time I was a little girl. Anyway, she was telling me leading roles could not go to black people at that time. So instead, they would put these movies out and cast the leading role, black actors, you know, a role for a black person, and they would just paint up these white people to play black people. And you can see a good example of this in the movie Othello, but of course there were more movies than just this one. And as you know, through the years, whenever Caucasoid actors and actresses do movies from the Bible where nobody was white, these movies are now flopping. They're not doing well at all. Didn't do well in America, and it got banned virtually across all of the Middle East. But you know, this is the funny part, y'all. Caucasoids claim to be the Egyptians. But every time they put these biblical movies out, guess who bans the movie and says it's historically inaccurate? Egypt. Wait, I thought you were the Egyptians. It gets banned all across Northern Africa, where they claim everybody in North Africa is white, and across the Middle East. So this movie flopped. Moses was not like Christian Bale. He was a black man. Now, Egypt bans a lot of their historic movies based on the Bible. And they've done this actually all throughout the decades. Whenever they come out with these movies, they get banned because they said they're not accurate. Okay? Every time these Caucasoids claim they were the Egyptians, it actually gets rejected by Egypt. It's just that we don't hear about it, but the Egyptian people themselves in Egypt says, no, that's not true. And the fact that they're rejecting their movies, that should pretty much sum it up. They don't believe Egyptians were white. And this is why you keep coming out with these Bible movies and they keep saying, hell no, we're not showing it here. Now, you remember the movie Russell Crowe played Noah. Noah got banned in Egypt and across all of the Middle East for not being historically accurate. All right, Noah again was a black man. He was a black man. He was not white. No one during that time period in the Bible were white. All right, so again, a movie that did not do well globally because people are no longer accepting a biblical cast that's all white. No one's accepting that anymore. And you won't tell the truth. So what are people doing? They're hitting you in the pocket now. Now, just imagine this. Elizabeth Taylor gets picked to play Cleopatra. All right? And, they go mad over it in the United States. But when it got to Egypt, Egypt said, "Hail to the Na." It's not accurate. But they've spent the greater part of their lives telling you Cleopatra was Greek. There's a BBC documentary that came out, I believe, like around 2014, might have been 13, where they confirmed that Cleopatra mother was definitely a Black African woman. And of course, it tore the Caucasoids up. It tore them up. But this was another movie casted, all white, and it was rejected. Now, some of you might remember urban myths, okay, when they tried to put a white face on Michael Jackson by giving, what was this guy, Joseph Fiennes, the role to play Michael Jackson, despite the fact that he has 2 living parents that are both Black. He has Black brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews, and they still casted Michael Jackson as white. And Urban Myths was rejected after a high number of complaints from not only the Jackson family, but fans, Michael Jackson fans. So this never came to light, and the show was rejected by the public. All right. And even through the years, they always try to do these Hannibal movies and these Attila the Hun movies. And those men were also Black, by the way. Attila the Hun was a Black man, and so was Hannibal. In fact, there's an ancient coin of Hannibal. This is Hannibal right here. Hannibal was described by the Greeks as a 6'5" dark-skinned man with braids. He was a warrior. All right. But every time they put a Hannibal movie out, it's some white dude. Now, again, historically inaccurate. Hannibal was a Black man. And it's just how he was described by the Greeks. And even the Asians have a problem with white America whitewashing their roles. Okay, so this article came out May 29th, 2017. Even the Asians are complaining. These Caucasoids are doing roles and the people were actually Asian. And a long time ago in movies in America, they would always depict Native Americans as white. What did they do? Well, they would come out with all these different movies and shows, and they would paint up and dress these Caucasoids like natives. Okay, instead of casting a real native. They don't want to do that because Caucasoids think they are everything in the world, and they're not. All right. Damn, you even put Dustin Hoffman in there as a native. That man don't hardly look like no native, but okay. So it's been so many movies where they have done this. They've taken Native American roles and painted up the actors and actresses and try to make them look native. They still look like a bunch of white people, but okay. And this country has had a long history of doing this. Especially back during the times when Westerns were real popular in America. Well, damn, they won't even let the Latinos be Latinos in movies. Oh, they even culture appropriate Latino characters. They would just cast all of these different white people in the roles. They want everybody to buy into the white fantasy that they are everything on the earth. And there's no way they can be everything on the earth because they are the absolute last group to show up on the earth. That means everything before them that they're looking at were here first, here before them. Black people were here first. So this is just a thing they do. They just got a hang up about not being everything on this earth. They want everybody to believe that they are everything, even when we know they're not. Please leave your comments and subscribe. And if you can, donate to this channel. Peace, family. We already know about the lynchings of Black people in this country. It's notorious. It was done all over the country, pretty widespread. Now, the Caucasoid wants you to believe that these lynchings only took place in the South. That is false. As you look at this list, it took place all over. But we're going to focus on white lynching. But we're also lynched at the hands of their own people all across this nation too. And you can see they got lynched actually in more states than Black people did. People did at the hands of their own people. So grand total of 1,297 whites, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine. Damn, even Maine hung one of you devils. Well, Maryland, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Nebraska, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, even Vermont. Y'all got hung in Vermont? Okay. Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. These were whites that hung other white people. White on white lynching, y'all, took place in America. Now, we already know about Black people. That's not news. But white on white lynching at the hands of their own people hung. But when you take it upon yourself to learn the actual history, it is so horrific and disgusting and most despicable thing you'll ever see. This is why it's debatable. that these Caucasoids are even human. And this is why I have a total disconnect from them. I had Caucasoid friends up until around 2007. And then I just let them all go. I got tired of the disagreements. I got tired of them taking on a position that only they should be able to speak freely. But if you speak freely, there's some issue with it. Nah, I'm sorry, but you won't treat me like that. That's unacceptable to me. Out of everything that we've been through in this whole country, and you think I should be suppressed in my speech? Yeah, right. It's not going to happen. This is why Caucasoids cannot shapes sold on Wall Street. It's not these mulatto-looking Indians that you're looking at today. They didn't even exist back then. All right, so let's just take a look at slavery in New York. Now, down there on Wall Street, it was a huge market. In fact, it was like one of the biggest hot spots back then. And it began in 1711. And it was a place to buy, sell, and rent a slave. The North had a lot of slaves. Now, the Caucasoids, they want you to believe that slavery only took place in the South. And most of these slaves were on plantations. Completely false. Slavery took place in most of this country. There were corporations like Del Monte that had, there were hospitals that had slaves. There were universities that had slaves. Okay, really, black women are the biggest contributor to gynecology in America. You know, it makes me laugh. Caucasoids walk around with their chest out, call themselves patriots, but no one built up this country. No Hispanics, Mexicans, Asians, Caucasoids. No one built this place up like black people did. They can all walk around and claim to be better than us all they want. But one thing they can never ever do is claim they built America. Black people built this bitch. And we're the only one that can say we built this bitch. If it wasn't for us, America would be a third world nation. And that's the damn truth. And come over here from scratch and ran this country. Black people had a hand